Hawaii, this is Pokalai Nui, and you are listening to Hawaiian Potpourri. Today is the 16th day of September in the year 2012, and this is our second program for this morning. We had been talking about a number of issues, but we have sort of laid off the topic of rail construction. It seems like it's a bygone issue, but not necessarily. It remains here to haunt us even while it's is sort of stashed away in limbo. You do have election going on, a general election for the mayor, and that determination will decide whether or not it really pushes forward or the new mayor will make every attempt to stop it. But in the meantime, the courts have imposed essentially a stay order prohibiting any further construction until the archaeological survey has been done. The Star Advertiser on Friday says in its front page that the delay over the archaeological survey could cost the city up to $90 million. It's sort of suggesting that it is due to the archaeological survey that you could cost the city $90 million. And I think it's a wrong slant, although we all know that the Star Advertiser is tied up with this conglomerate of those who support the rail itself, and you can see it in not only its opinions, but those that the Star Advertiser seems to be associating itself with within the business community, the top 1%ers in Honolulu who are trying to grab at some of these contracts. The real question is, what is the reason for the increasing cost? The archaeological survey is merely the scapegoat or the excuse. Sometimes the excuse is made that it is those Hawaiians or those people who can only talk about the bones, the iwi, and saving the bones, and why save the bones when we need transportation and all that kind of stuff. The real culprits behind these expenses, $90 million here, another $1.6 billion there, and all of these high costs or increasing costs to build the rail, is not due to the Hawaiians who are making the complaint. It is not due to the bones that were buried there perhaps 400 years ago, or however long these bones had been there. It is due to those people, those quote planners, who had planned for the movement of rail around the laws that were to protect the environment, that were to protect the archaeological sites. And because these laws were in place, these folks, these so-called planners, had conspired to circumvent the law. It's the same way that they did it with regards to the super ferry. The courts have slapped their hands now both times for this type of behavior. And especially with Kirk Caldwell, who should have known better because he had been involved in both of these ploys to ignore these laws. And look at what it's costing them now. And so don't blame those people who have the guts to stand up and protect the rights that they have and to insist that the laws be followed by all parties, by all projects. And there should be no exemptions. And yet you have the city and the state planners who say, well, it's too big, it's moving forward already, and the train have left the station and there's no stopping it anymore. That same kind of garbage that was being told to Ben Cayetano in one of the earlier debates by both Mr. Caldwell and the current mayor, the very short-term mayor, Peter Carlisle, that, well, it's too late, there's nothing you can do about it. Well, the courts had another opinion and put a stop to it, as we have seen. And so the most recent report is, yes, indeed, they have begun the first phase of digging at Kaka'ako, and like what had been predicted, they did find bone fragment. I think it was a 4-inch piece of what seemed to be human bone, and there may be other funerary objects in that area. And that goes to the credit of whoever was the archaeologist or whoever was doing the dig at that time. And they come out of, what is the name of that organization? Something Hawaii, I think it is. Let me see if I can find the name for it. Well, I can't find it immediately. I think it's called Cultural Surveys Hawaii. But thankfulness to the integrity of the person who did find the bone, because it's so simple just to slip it in your pocket and pretend that you never found it and just move along under a pretense that it's not there. But that did not happen in this particular case. The person reported the find and they proceeded accordingly. All right, so we'll see what happens in the future with regards to rail construction, which ties very much into the situation of the mayor's race. And that we haven't heard, not recently, too much advertising. However, the Honolulu Weekly has put out a piece in its September 12th to the 18th edition of the Honolulu Weekly, and if you come across it, you'll see the smiling face of Kirk Caldwell, who supports rail, and of Ben Cayetano, more with a smirk rather than a smile. Ben, learn to smile. Well, he seemed to be looking askance at the other side where Kirk is at, and Ben has something up his sleeves also, it seems, but he is well, he may be having something up his sleeve. Well, what they have done is essentially write about the two candidates and which one is a real ecological candidate. Tom Kaufman writes that article, and Tom, I think there's no secret about it, is a supporter of at least the lawsuit that Ben Cayetano has headed. Well, the article says that he is a Cayetano supporter, but Tom Kaufman tries to do a review of the ecological issues, comparing Cayetano's record to Kirk Caldwell. Aside from that, you do have the editor who does another comparison of the same issue, Caldwell and the super ferry, showing that Caldwell was also involved in the super ferry, and then reviewing Cayetano's record as governor. You know, Caldwell has been sort of in the head of these movements for perhaps 2 years as the city manager after Mufi had resigned, but he was already the city manager when before Mufi had resigned, so he had some opportunity to direct this issue of the rail. But in terms of public service and being up in front, very limited. Cayetano, on the other hand, had been lieutenant governor for 4 years, then became governor. I'm sorry, lieutenant governor, he may have been there for 8 years, and then governor for another 8, and previous to that had been very active in the state legislature. So he has been able to build up quite a record, and his record shows that he has quite a positive record for the ecology. And so there you have the comparison between the two. I'm not going to go into any further detail unless someone wants to call and discuss that matter further. All right, with regards to local issues, it seems that the governor had some kind or perhaps unkind words for those who have been attacking the PDLC, the PLDC, Public Land Development Corporation, a corporation established by the state legislature without very much public notice, and a corporation that gives the PLDC sort of superpowers to be able to buy and sell lands, especially the state stolen lands, or what other people call the ceded lands, and to trade in the ceded lands. Laura Thielen writes an article under Island Voices. And so let's visit Laura's ideas and see what she has to say. Now, Laura Thielen is the Republican voice and vote, one of the very, very few Republicans. But Laura has a very interesting history. We'll go into her history later on. She says the recent University of Hawaii debacle taught us that it's a bad idea for amateurs to invest state money. We paid $200,000 for that mistake. How would you feel if we pay millions or lose public trust lands for the next mistake? Critics of the Public Land Development Corporation, the PLDC, has focused on its superpowers to bypass land use regulations when developing state land. This is valid criticism, but it overlooks another PLDC superpower, the ability to invest state funds and use public trust lands to secure development deals. The PLDC is authorized to make speculative investments even when no professional investor is involved. The only statutory standard is that the PLDC have a, quote, reasonable possibility that it will recoup at least its initial investment. Is that the standard? Wow. So the goal is to invest state money in order to maybe break even? Does any trust hold its board members to such low standards? To further complicate matters, the PLDC can invest in the private companies it contracts with to develop state land. We're not talking about building a snack shop in a state park. The PLDC is authorized to develop hotels and industrial projects. These are multi-million-dollar developments. How does the PLDC hold a developer accountable for meeting contractual obligations when it is a part owner of that company? If state land secures a failed development, do we lose control over the land? Is there anything that assures us that the PLDC will enter into such agreements with only the public interest in mind? We've learned the hard way that land is power in Hawaii. Over time, we adopted strict standards to prevent abuse by state agencies. For example, all 7 members of the Board of Land and Natural Resources must disclose all direct and indirect interest in any organization doing business with a department, must disqualify themselves from any decision affecting such interest. No more than 3 members may be from the same political party, and any proposed sale of land must go through the state legislature. None of these safeguards apply to the PLDC. The PLDC board consists of 5 members, 3 department heads who serve at the governor's pleasure, and each one appointed by the Senate President and Speaker of the House. There are no strict qualifications relating to investment or development expertise, no strict standards for disclosure or disqualification to prevent self-dealing, no express requirements that a PLDC sale of state land go through the state legislature. The Star Advertiser's recent PLDC editorial recognized concerns, but implied that we might or we ought to give it a chance to see what it can do. Then the paper criticized the state agency responsible for developing Kaka'ako, the Hawaii Community Development Authority, for being too secretive and shutting the public out of discussion over the development of a proposed 650-foot high-rise. Ironically, it is HCDA's authority to bypass virtually all land use processes that allows it to be secretive. The land use processes are the checks and balances created to provide public access to information during the development process. If we find HCDA's secretiveness worrisome, just wait. HCDA's powers are limited to a small geographic area in urban Honolulu. PLDC's superpowers apply to more than a quarter of all the land in the state and all submerged lands. Personally, I prefer to learn from the recent UH debacle. Let's repeal Act 55 and the PLDC before the public has to pay a higher cost for a much more painful lesson. So this is the editorial statement of Laura Thielen. Laura has an interesting history. Not only is she a Republican and has been a Republican for, I guess, a number of years, she is the mother of, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was thinking of Cynthia Thielen, and Laura is the daughter of Cynthia Thielen. Laura had been the head under the legal administration of the Department of Land and Natural Resources, and she had been aligned with the Republican Party, subsequently changed sides and came over on the Democrat ticket and declared herself a Democrat and sort of a secret or a closet Democrat, I think you could call it that, for a number of years. She comes from a Republican family, however, and that is Cynthia Thielen, a Republican. Laura, so Laura is quite, quote, new in that she has a history of politics in her family, had been herself active in the legal administration, and now being a candidate running in the Waimanalo area for House of Representative. And yes, and so my apologies to both Laura and to Cynthia for mixing them up. I was going to make quite a bit of comment about Cynthia Thielen, and I'm going to do it anyway. But Cynthia is the mother of this person who had written this article. Cynthia has been a Republican and a very staunch Republican, somewhat outspoken. I guess all of the Republicans need to be outspoken in order to survive in a heavily Democratic or Democrat legislature. Cynthia, prior to running for political office, had been involved in community activities, and at least for myself and for my wife, Puanani, most noteworthy in her struggle with the Protect Kaho'olawe Ohana, or supporting the Protect Kaho'olawe Ohana, acting as that organization's attorney. She had been working with the law firm of Boyce Brown, who many of you may recall Boyce being very active in the protection of Native Hawaiian rights, in the protection of human rights, civil rights, making a name for himself both in the issues of ecology as well as criminal law, and in many other ways. A fine attorney. Eventually he left Hawaii, and I would say it was in about the 1980s, because I remember his work with the Office of Hawaiian Affairs when I was there, and that was from 82 to 86, so he must have left even after that. That was Boyce Brown. But Cynthia had been marching along with us in these various causes. And my wife, Puanani, actually, when she did some law clerking, had clerked with Cynthia, and as she represented the issue of the PKO. And that's where Puanani herself got sort of a start in that area, more directly involved in the PKO. Prior to that, Puanani had been more closely associated with my law firm, and we had engaged in other land issues, but not necessarily the PKO. We were addressing more the issue of Hawaiian sovereignty, independence issues, as well as trying to protect lands, and so we were somewhat directed in other areas, not necessarily in the cultural issues that were raised in the Protect Kaho'olawe Ohana. Okay, so with regards to that, I guess that's enough said, and we can move on to other issues. If you would like to call and share an opinion on any of these issues, the telephone number here is 524-1080. The next issue is sort of local and yet not local. It's with regards to what's happening in Topeka, Kansas, and they say that the Kansas election officials have said last week, Thursday, they want more information before deciding whether to remove President Barack Obama from the state's fall ballot. The All-Republican State Objections Board heard arguments Thursday on a claim from a Manhattan, Kansas resident that Obama is not eligible to be president because his father was from Kenya. The resident, Joe Montgomery, 51, also questions whether Obama has a valid birth certificate. You guessed it. Okay. So the board is going to hold hearings, and I think it's kind of silly. You can just look at the initial claim and see that it is a silly claim. The fact that the person's father is not an American citizen without challenging the mother's citizenship makes it a dead issue. It should be DOA, as I would have called it, dead on arrival. Anyway, the board said Thursday it wants certified documents from Hawaii. Kobash plans to have his staff contact officials in Arizona and Mississippi, which also have looked into such issues. Hawaii sent Arizona official verification of Obama's birth record. Now, have they done the same for other presidential candidates? Have they done the same for proof of Mitt Romney's birth within the U.S. borders? Have they done the same for candidates prior to Barack Obama? If not, I would suggest that it is merely a signal of the racism that is going on, colored under some other excuse, but in essence it is racism. And it is because it's Barack Obama being what they call a black man. We in Hawaii would call him Hapa. That is part of at least two races. Okay. Now we have one call, and we have less than a minute and a half. We'll take the call, but it has to be a very quick call. Aloha, caller, go ahead.
Very quick. I'm sorry, I didn't realize what time it was.
Me too, until I heard the telephone ring.
Real good. This business of the ballot changing, isn't there some law that would be able to make such a thing, to do such a thing illegal? I mean, perhaps if a person qualifies with a number of people behind him to put his name on that ballot, that it can't be refused. Anyway, I think that could be challenged legally. And then I thought, well, all right, let's play the game. how about write-in? Or is that against the law there too? So one could get really mean about it. Not, can make a crack like, don't they know how to write? Is there some fault here? And the answer is could be yes. If we had more time, I could take that back to the convention.
Okay.
Later on, perhaps.
Okay. Call back. Call back. I'll wait for your call. Thank you.
Okay.
Aloha.
Kaulana na pua o Hawaii Kupa ama hope o ka aina Iki mai ka elele o ka loko ino Pala pala anunu me ka paka